Ugandan cultural icon, the Honorable Robert Kyagulanyi, otherwise known as Bobi Wine, has risen from musician to MP to presidential candidate. He challenges incumbent Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni. 34 years ago, President Museveni was himself a key figure in removing several autocratic rulers. He initially lived up to the hopes of his people and was successful in creating change.
Museveni, again, certainly was a transformative figure who came to power at the head of a movement.
When President Museveni was my age, he is quoted to have said that the problem of Africa and Uganda in particular are the leaders that overstay in power.
In the late 1970s and then early 1980s, figures like Idi Amin were ruling the country.
The previous leader of Uganda, Milton Obote, has a very bad track record. So Museveni in the bush and with his fighters slowly but surely moved towards the capital and then eventually take power in 1986.
And so Museveni comes to power in a context of widespread instability and violence and brings to Uganda a kind of new vision and implemented a number of reforms that really helped to stabilize the politics and the economy in that country so that by the 1980s, the late 1980s, 1990s, Uganda had really emerged as one of the most promising countries in the East African region.
When I was ambassador in Uganda from 1991 to 1994. I found President Museveni to be one of the most intelligent and thoughtful and engaging leaders that I had come across. He was clearly determined to improve the safety and security of his country.
President Museveni had revolutionary policies on combating HIV and AIDS. He also welcomed refugees and the Asian population that previous autocratic rulers had exiled and persecuted.
The constitution that President Museveni and his government put together in the mid-90s was a fairly good one. It had the kinds of clauses that you'd want, restrictions on executive power, had all of the protections of human rights. But over time, they've either amended the constitution or founded ways around ignoring some of these principal liberal documents and values.
Obviously, he's held on to power and lost sight of some of the reasons that he chose to launch the Bush War in the first place.
More and more, we see laws being passed that are repressive. We see critics of the president himself being jailed or facing criminal charges or physical abuse. We've seen the security services ramp up their repressive tactics.
Almost all of the people who were around him in the early days were arrested, exiled, killed, so that over time the power has been centralized in a way that is, I think, deeply unhealthy to any sort of democratic transition.
President Museveni is 74 years old, and so by removing the age limit, he's now eligible to run until, forever.
And so even at this point, way past the point where he could have reaped the benefits of the good work he did early on, he chooses to stay in power in ways that have become deeply counterproductive and really threaten the long-term stability that he was actually able to bring to the country in the first place.
There is still a certain nostalgia for what he has brought. I think there are just a lot of people who are done with him. There are starting to be real questions about the scenarios for Uganda's future, and will Uganda ever have a peaceful political transition? So far, that has not occurred since independence, and President Museveni should be worried about that as well.
President Museveni achieved what he thought was the liberation of Uganda violently. And violence, in the analysis that we've made in the past, only replaces one dictator with another. So we want to achieve this not as a violent group, but as a nation that has stood up and non-violently asserted its rights. And if we achieve it as a nation, then we as a nation will have the ability to hold anybody and everybody accountable, including myself. And that's what I believe we should do as a country to safeguard ourselves from any future dictatorship.